I was crouched in a scorching desert halfway across the world when the email landed. My entire marriage collapsed inside a single PDF attachment. 13 years, gone in one digital swoop. My name is Logan Hayes, age 41, a staff sergeant with the 105th Airborne. I'd only been stationed at Himsar Base in Uganda for 4 months. When Samantha, my wife back home, decided she'd had her fill of waiting for me, the subject line on her message read, "Let's behave like grown-ups." But the body contained exactly 3 sentences and an attachment that changed my life. She wrote that she'd filed divorce papers, emptied our joint account, and moved her new boyfriend, some guy named Brandon, into our home in Bolton, Montana. I remember reading that brief message twice, absorbing it like a punch to the gut, then calmly shutting my laptop and heading to the communal shower. I told no one. I didn't kick a wall or break into tears. Instead, when I returned from my shift hours later, I sent her a single-word reply, "Understood." A buddy in my unit, Corporal Burke, noticed something was off when I climbed into my bunk that same evening. He asked quietly, "Everything okay?" without even looking up from a well-worn paperback he was reading. I shrugged. "Just stuff at home," I said, hoping that was enough. He didn't push it, because people in uniform learn to read the room. We know when to let each other process private battles in silence. Truthfully, I wasn't startled by Samantha's email. The signs had been planting themselves long before I boarded the plane to Uganda. Sometimes, life's biggest betrayals unfold in micro moments, small hints that accumulate until they're too loud to ignore. 6 months before my deployment, all kinds of subtle shifts started creeping into our daily routine. Samantha stopped asking how my day went and began working late at the medical office where she managed appointments. She started going to a gym 3 times a week, but never came home sweaty. New clothes she insisted on purchasing for fresh starts, new friends I'd never met, and new excuses for stepping out because she needed space. I never confronted her directly. That's just not in my nature. Raised by a father who believed in calm observation, I'd learned to look for evidence before speaking, a trait that served me well in the military. So rather than accuse Samantha of anything, I quietly prepared for the worst. Looking back, I realize how methodical I'd become in protecting my future. I forwarded crucial papers, my birth certificate, the marriage license, the deed to our house, into a secured storage locker. That place was in a different part of town, nowhere near our usual haunts, so no curious eyes would question why I was shifting valuable documents. I also packed up a few sentimental heirlooms, my grandfather's old watch, plus my mother's silver cutlery set, and stuck them in the same locker. At the same time, I opened a fresh bank account under my name at a separate institution, dripping in a bit of money from each paycheck. It wasn't enough to rouse suspicion, just a quiet cushion in case everything unraveled. The night before I deployed, Samantha gave me a stiff hug in the airport terminal. There was no tearful farewell, no trembling voice. She merely said, "Stay safe, okay?" and turned away. I should have realized then that my absence wasn't hitting her the way it used to, but a part of me still clung to hope, the lingering loyalty that love can sometimes conjure. Deep down, though, I sensed she was already stepping into a life without me. I had that pressing feeling in my bones, like walking into a dark corridor, knowing a locked door awaits at the end. We met years earlier, at a friend's backyard barbecue. I was back from Al-Basra on an extended leave, trying to decompress from the tension overseas, and a buddy named Trevor invited me to come over for ribs and beer. Samantha, finishing up a nursing degree at that time, captured my attention with one easy smile. Thunder boomed in the distance, and she laughed as she scrambled to cover the dessert table from the drizzle. That carefree spark made me think she could handle anything, even the complexities of military life. So, in record time, 8 months precisely, we got hitched and set up house together. In the beginning, she'd proudly say she admired my willingness to serve, but her father was a bank manager, her brother a pharmacist, and no one in her family had ever worn a uniform. Later, her questions echoed, "When will you transition to a real job?" She seemed ignorant of the reality that I'd already served for nearly 15 years, which put me well on track for a full military career. I didn't see it as killing time, but that's how she perceived it. We purchased our home in 2015, just a modest 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood on the western edge of Bolton. Through my VA loan, I managed the official mortgage in my name only, but naturally, I added Samantha to the deed once we tied the knot. To me, that's what marriage entailed, unwavering trust, merging your life with another person's. Soon after, my father passed away from a massive heart attack one snowy November day. 3 years down the line, we lost my mother to lung cancer, despite her never smoking. They left me some inheritance, not a fortune, but a decent chunk to wipe out our college debts and set aside a safety net. Yet with each deployment, 2 tours in Al-Basra and now 2 in Evander, Samantha's restlessness grew audible. She admitted once, late at night, that she didn't sign up for all the waiting, for the anxious phone calls from across the world. "I can't handle being alone every time you're called to serve," she'd whisper. I tried to understand, to compromise, but the army was my anchor, the place where I fully belonged, especially after losing both my parents and having no siblings. My unit was my extended clan. By 2020, cracks were spreading faster. Samantha frowned whenever I phoned on her so-called ladies' nights. She teased me about how her friend Nina had divorced a boring husband and now lived her best life, traveling around. She even implied that maybe we lacked common ground, that if I wasn't prepared to settle in a civilian job, we might want very different things. I suggested counseling. She shook her head that we were just in a phase. Then came those unaccounted late nights at the medical office, weekend outings with people I'd never met, and the same recurring signals that she was drifting away. My dad's patient voice still echoed in my head, telling me to gather facts, remain calm, not start a fight unless I was ready to finish it. So I watched her changes in car mileage, nodded at her half-explanations, and stashed more of my pay in that secondary bank account. For 4 months in Evander, I poured my energy into the mission. Samantha's occasional messages were short and distant, often typed in a rush, no "miss you so much" sentiments, no heartfelt updates on how things were going back home. I should have felt heartbreak, but in truth, numbness replaced sorrow. So that day when an innocuous email pinged my laptop, I expected some routine note about the dog or a leaky faucet. I got 3 sentences instead. Our marriage was done, she drained the joint account, and her new flame, Brandon, was settled into my living room. Her subject line, "Let's behave like grown-ups," clashed with the gut punch of her requests. No tears came as I processed the lines. I only recalled a faint headache and the familiar desert wind buffeting the tent that served as my on-base quarters. After my shift, alone with my thoughts and swirling anger, I typed that single word, "understood," and sent it. That was my entire reply, a testament to the grey emptiness I felt. If she was determined to move on, let her, I thought. Except, unbeknownst to her, I wasn't completely exposed. I had contingencies, a private stash of money, a safe deposit box with significant documents, plus a mortgage that was only in my name. She might imagine me powerless in that desert, but she underestimated how thoroughly I'd prepared. Burke asked me again, quietly, if something was wrong. I just gave him a vague answer. In uniform, men and women often sense each other's unspoken stories. We respect boundaries where we can, and in that environment, divorces are not uncommon. People drift when one spouse is thousands of miles away, grappling with an existence that feels intangible to the one at home. So I suspect Burke guessed the news but didn't pry. Night after night, I buried myself in routine morning PT, daily patrols, quick meals at the chow hall. My mind refused to dwell on Samantha's betrayal, yet also wouldn't let it go entirely, swirling like dust in the corners of my consciousness. 2 weeks later, while I was picking at my dinner in the bustling mess hall, my phone buzzed, another bank notification. This time it revealed a sudden withdrawal, $88,500 from our savings. My fork clattered onto the tray. The sum, which we'd saved over years, was nearly obliterated in one move. I checked the updated balance and found just $29 left in checking, an insulting pittance. Our savings account carried no more than a few dollars, as if it had been systematically gutted. I stared at the digital screen until Burke, noticing my shock, asked if I'd gotten bad news from home. Nah, I lied. My heart pounded like mortar fire. That night, I marched to the base's communications center, dialed the bank from a secure line, and discovered Samantha's transactions had been happening for weeks. Funny, I thought, how quiet theft can be when it's disguised as marital business. I found myself propped against a hallway wall afterward, phone heavy in my hand. As the reality sank in, she'd consumed almost everything we had. That was when Sergeant Cordova spotted me looking like a dazed man. Word traveled quickly that I seemed rattled, so Burke eventually cornered me again, and I confessed. She drained our accounts. There's someone else living in my place. He took it in with a grim nod, didn't shower me in sympathy or cliché pep talk, just asked, "So what are you gonna do?" I had no immediate answer, but I felt the deep burn of quiet determination in my gut. I'd spent my adult life planning for possible ambushes and unexpected threats. Now the danger came not from an enemy across a barricade, but from my own spouse. It seemed surreal, but I refused to be undone. That night, unable to rest, I logged onto our home security system using the base's limited Wi-Fi. Samantha had forgotten or chosen to ignore that I could access the cameras remotely. It loaded my living room feed in crisp color. A tall stranger, I guessed to be Brandon, strolled leisurely across my hardwood floors, whistling for our dog. He rummaged in my kitchen, flipping open cabinets, eventually pulling out the mug I used every morning when I was home.
Samantha entered the shot, wearing a brand new sweater I didn't recognize, a bright grin on her face as though nothing had collapsed. They looked so comfortable, so settled in what used to be my space. Cold anger shivered inside me. I closed my laptop. Right then I outlined a mental checklist. First, contact my old army buddy Trevor, who now practiced law. Second, examine the fine print of the VA loan and recall any restrictions on who can refinance. Third, try for an emergency leave if possible, though it might be difficult. Still, I wanted to be thorough before I took any big steps. Wrath was not going to guide me. I would let reason steer my moves. Emotional outbursts rarely solve complicated crises. I planned to gather facts, document everything in black and white, and let Samantha or her accomplices walk themselves into a legal minefield. Something told me that if I stayed calm, they'd reveal all I needed to know. At 0500, before my usual shift, I emailed Trevor with a crisp subject line, requesting confidential legal help. Urgent. He replied swiftly, instructing me to use a secure channel for calls. When I finally reached him, I learned what my instincts had already predicted. Samantha, by forging my name or otherwise deceiving the lending officers, could be in violation of both state and federal law if she was tapping into the mortgage or misusing funds. Trevor told me to gather every transaction detail, all relevant forms, then ship them to him so we could form a strategy. "You sure you want to go on the offensive?" he asked. "It can get ugly," but I couldn't see an alternative. Samantha had left me no choice. She'd stolen from me, literally, and neglected even the courtesy of sharing honest words. From that moment on, I pivoted into silent mission mode, meticulously chronicling events in my phone's notepad app. The next few weeks tested my patience. While war rumbled in the background, patrols, threat assessments, the daily risk of roadside explosives, an entirely different battle waited stateside. Each day I reminded myself that rushing home prematurely might jeopardize my next steps. I needed time to gather enough evidence so that upon my return, I wouldn't be trapped in a half-baked plan. Samantha and Brandon believed me stuck halfway across the earth, powerless. If they wanted to exploit that advantage, I'd let them for a short while I methodically set up the pieces to reclaim my life. But then came a new blow. I was wolfing down a quick breakfast in the chow line when a phone alert told me $47,000 more had vanished. Our final stash of emergency savings, liquidated. I had no illusions left that Samantha was simply covering bills. It was systematic. After that day, I barely tasted my meals. I do recall staring into my tray, rage threatening to surface, but the discipline ingrained in me by the army kept me outwardly cool. I tested the bank's patience by calling again, specifying that I suspected fraud and demanding they freeze any further transfers. The clerk rattled off disclaimers and said I'd need an official police report or a formal notice from my attorney. Over the next hours, I arranged both. Late that afternoon, I found a deserted corner in the recreation tent and breathed. My head spun. That's when Burke approached softly, almost on tiptoe, and said he'd heard rumors I was in trouble. At first I wanted to keep everything locked inside, but something in his eyes told me I could trust him, so I laid out the bare bones. Samantha had taken advantage of my absence to tear apart our financial foundation, that I had the feeling she wasn't acting alone, and I was determined to respond properly. Burke inhaled sharply, but made no big fuss. "All right," he said. "You need anything, let me know." Then he tapped my shoulder in quiet solidarity. "In deployments, that's the closest form of comfort you might get. A few times my anger nearly got the better of me. I wanted to hurl accusations with the force of rocket fire, but each time I paused. There was an older, colder streak in me that realized how emotional storms rarely lead to victory. My objective was to regain what was mine, protect what I'd worked my entire adult life to build, and bring justice if Samantha or her new partner had broken the law. That clarity kept me grounded. I refused to send a single snarky message, refused to plead for her to come to her senses. Perhaps she expected me to rant or threaten, giving them reason to spin themselves as victims of a controlling soldier. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Even so, late at night, I'd catch myself staring at the corrugated metal above my bunk and wonder how our relationship had decayed to this point. We had once shared a world, called each other soulmates, joked about baby names. Now I was forging alliances with attorneys, worried I might be dragged into a labyrinth of lawsuits. I told myself it was foolish to dwell on what went wrong. My father once taught me the importance of moving forward, no matter how thick the jungle of regrets might become. 30 days passed since Samantha's initial bombshell. Then, on an uneventful afternoon in early autumn, another shock arrived. A staffer from a local bank in Bolton left me a cryptic voicemail. She said there was a discrepancy with the mortgage refinance application and needed me to call her back immediately. My heart lurched. I hadn't initiated any refinance. A rush of adrenaline kicked up, because an unauthorized refinance tied to a VA loan could be catastrophic. I called them back on a secure line, identified myself, and braced for the worst. Sure enough, the loan officer explained in hushed, awkward tones how I had appeared to sign off on a new mortgage arrangement for $320,000, designed to pay off the old loan plus equity disbursements. No, I calmly told him. I'd been overseas for 4 months. I definitely wasn't signing any papers. That quote says, when everything started to snap into sharper definition, Samantha or Brandon, or both, must have forged my name to free up huge amounts of equity. My mind reeled. This wasn't a matter of petty marital vengeance. It was sliding into felony territory. The bank officer apologized profusely, worried about the legal ramifications of letting a fraudulent mortgage slip through their system. He asked me to send documents proving my deployment timeline, which I did with the help of my commanding officer. By the time the day ended, I had already arranged an official police complaint. Next, I gave Trevor a complete rundown. "We're stepping into serious territory," he said, voice taut. "This might be bigger than a messy divorce." Then something else surfaced. A few suspicious lumps in Samantha's track record. While combing through recorded transactions, Trevor found checks made out to a name we didn't recognize, Gary Shelton, apparently affiliated with a real estate firm known for quick sales. Summaries from the bank implied that more than $15,000 had been transferred to this Shelton. I scribbled the name down on a notepad. Another puzzle piece, or so it seemed. "What do we do?" I asked Trevor. He sighed. "We keep going, gather evidence, and figure out if there's a broader swindle. Meanwhile, try not to tip them off. Let them think you're busy overseas." A sense of dread coiled in my gut. Could Samantha truly be orchestrating a grand-scale con against me? Or maybe she'd fallen into the clutches of something bigger, with Brandon as the ringmaster. Each possibility felt more bizarre than the last. I told myself to stay calm. There was zero use in flailing around with half-baked theories. Finally, the day came when I got clearance for an early return to the States on family emergency grounds. "Take care of what you need to," my commanding officer said, patting my shoulder. Part of me felt relief. Part of me felt the coil of tension tighten. It'd be face-to-face time, and I wasn't sure if Samantha would greet me with apologies or anger, if she'd cower behind Brandon, or if she'd already left him. The only certainty was that I had to be stealthy, keep the advantage that surprise sometimes brings in a conflict, especially if the conflict is your life. I touched down on American soil, feeling disoriented. Desert heat gave way to crisp, biting wind as I stepped off the plane in Salt Lake City, connecting to a final flight to Bolton. My uniform was wrinkled, dust from Evander still clinging to my boots. The swirl of normal travelers around me, sped by wearing puffy coats or suits, each bent on errands or family gatherings. I felt like I'd been dropped into an alien planet where the language was the same, but the context completely different. I marched to the kiosk, rented a mid-size sedan under a partial alias, just my middle name, so they wouldn't trace me easily if they expected me at the house. Then I drove to a small motel on the far side of Bolton, paying cash for a room whose drapes smelled faintly of second-hand smoke. It was modest, but it offered me anonymity. Trevor met me the next morning at a quiet diner in a neighboring county. He slid into the booth across from me, eyebrows raised when he saw my hollow expression. "You look exhausted." I merely nodded. My body still felt like it was running on Evander time, half a day out of sync. Over black coffee, Trevor detailed everything he'd uncovered: bank statements, suspicious real estate listings, plus a new twist. Brandon, it turned out, had a rap sheet featuring 2 DUIs and a minor fraud conviction, all under a previous name. Trevor suspected Samantha might be in deeper trouble than she realized. I insisted that I wanted more than personal vengeance. I wanted a thorough approach that brought truth to the surface. And yes, I wanted to keep what was legitimately mine. We parted ways with a plan. Trevor would handle formal investigations and coordinate with the local authorities. I'd avoid direct confrontation with Samantha for a few days, but keep an eye on the house. If there was an active real estate listing in the works, it'd pop up soon, so we needed proof. The next few nights, I parked down the street from my old home, headlights off, often in the early hours when the neighborhood was sleeping. One time, I saw Brandon's tall form silhouetted behind the living room blinds, and a pang of anger jabbed at my chest. That was my couch he'd sprawled upon, my dog licking his hand. I left them to it, though every nerve in me wanted to storm in.
Not many nights later, around 10 in the evening, I watched from darkened windows as a real estate agent's car bearing the name Shelton and Associates on the door rolled down my block and parked in my driveway. The agent stepped out, phone in hand, and Brandon greeted him. Through my vantage, I recognized the face from a business website I'd once glimpsed. This had to be Gary Shelton, the man who'd received thousands of dollars. My chest tightened. I recorded everything on my phone's camera, hoping the grainy footage would be of some use. While they walked around snapping pictures of my property, I clenched the steering wheel. They were planning to sell it out from under me, my place, purchased with a VA loan after years of service. A day later, Trevor texted me that he'd discovered further evidence of forging. My supposed signature was scrawled on official documents for a new sale, listing Brandon as a co-owner. It was enraging. All I could think was how carefully they timed everything to coincide with my deployment, believing I'd be tied up with duty. They must have bet I'd simply sign off on the final settlement, or that I couldn't handle the stress of a transcontinental legal battle. They obviously didn't know my style, or that I might have more allies. In the army, we're taught never to go into a critical operation alone. That very evening, while scanning the real estate site for any sign of my house, a call from a blocked number jolted me. It was an FBI agent, last name Larkin, who explained they'd been investigating Gary Shelton and Brandon for some time on suspicion of scamming military families. "We got word from a local bank that you might be a victim," she said, voice unwavering. "We'd like to talk if you have time." The magnitude of it crashed over me. My personal heartbreak was just one piece of a ring that targeted multiple service members. Agent Larkin and her partner, Agent Kim, arranged to meet me the next day at a federal building in a city about an hour away. Nervous tension pulsed in my veins as I walked through those doors, holding a manila folder stuffed with everything Trevor and I had gathered: screenshots, financial statements, partial recordings from security cameras. The agents listened intently, occasionally exchanging pointed glances that betrayed a "we've seen this before" look. When I finished speaking, Larkin gently shut her notepad. "You said you served 20 years. That's a big chunk of your life to give to your country. Terribly sorry you're having to face this," she told me. Kim added that Brandon and Shelton had done something eerily similar to at least 2 other families, but lacked conclusive evidence or a key witness willing to talk in detail. "Your testimony and your proof," he said, "could be the final puzzle piece that locks in a solid federal case." I nodded, determined, and promised them full cooperation. But the bigger question gnawed at me: how deeply was Samantha involved? In the best-case scenario, she'd been duped and manipulated by Brandon, believing that forging my name was simply a shortcut to solve money problems. In the worst-case scenario, she was an active participant in the con, taking advantage of the fact that I was halfway around the globe. For the first time in months, my chest heaved under the weight of betrayal. No matter how I turned the puzzle, the pieces stung me like shards of glass. We parted with the plan to keep me in the loop. They asked me not to confront Samantha or Brandon in person just yet. Building an airtight case was crucial. If I marched in, fists raised, I could spook them into hiding or destroying evidence. So I left determined to see justice done. 5 days later, I got my chance. An alert from my security cameras showed intense activity in the living room. Brandon was hosting Gary Shelton. They were discussing a proposed listing price and how soon they could close the deal. It was all audible through the camera's feed, which I'd set to record both audio and video. The men discussed a cash buyer already lined up, the specific day to finalize the listing, and how to handle me, the absent spouse. They called me a non-issue, assuming I'd accept a quick settlement. At one point, Gary joked about forging certain final documents if needed. Fury ignited in me, but I remembered the caution from Agents Larkin and Kim: gather proof, do not act prematurely. I discreetly forwarded the feed to both Trevor and the FBI, adding a note that it was all happening in real time. That same evening, I sat in my rental car a block away, heart pounding, as 2 unmarked vehicles plus a local police squad car converged on my driveway. I watched men in suits, FBI presumably, knock on my front door, then quietly escort Gary Shelton out in handcuffs. Brandon too emerged, flanked by uniformed police. He looked startled, no trace of that swagger I'd seen in the video. An agent carried out a box labeled documents, presumably seizing evidence from inside the house. My phone buzzed with a text from Larkin: "We have them. Keep your distance. We'll call you soon." For a minute I just breathed, letting the adrenaline fade enough to keep me from trembling. When the tension subsided, I noticed Samantha's car wasn't there. She must have been out, maybe over at work, or who knows where. I pictured the moment she'd return home to discover the law had turned her world upside down. Meanwhile, I stayed put, like a soldier patiently guarding the perimeter. Even with Brandon and Gary technically in custody, I needed to see how it all resolved. I was also bracing for backlash. Would Samantha claim ignorance? Would she confront me? Another text lit up my phone. Trevor updating that the feds had discovered numerous cases tying Brandon and Shelton to forgeries, equity theft, and real estate fraud. They were coordinating with local insiders, Trevor wrote. "You lucked out by installing those cameras." Luck, I thought. Maybe a little, but also caution. The same caution that drove me to protect critical items before I shipped off to Evander. If I'd been reckless, the story might end with me losing everything. I spent that night alone in my motel room. Dawn arrived with windshield frost sparkling on my rental car. Over a cheap cup of coffee, I scrolled through text messages I'd deliberately ignored. One was from Samantha, reading, "Logan, we have to talk. Something big is happening. I want to clear the air." The next message was from a number I didn't recognize, possibly belonging to her friend or co-worker. They asked me to call soon, presumably about the arrests at my address. On some level, I knew I'd eventually have to see her in person, but my priority was meeting the FBI, providing a thorough statement about the events that had led us here. By lunchtime, I was sitting in that same federal building, across the desk from Agents Larkin and Kim again. They walked me through what they'd discovered. A ring was orchestrating a series of property flip frauds by targeting unsuspecting service members or the spouses of deployed personnel. Brandon was a key player, tasked with seducing or befriending those spouses, forging documents, and funneling money through multiple channels. Gary Shelton was the facilitator, a broker who specialized in cash sales that allowed the operation to launder money from different states. We suspect your wife had some awareness, but to what degree is less clear, Larkin explained. Kim nodded in agreement. We do have texts and emails that suggest she might have known about forging your signature. Whether she realized the entire scale of the scam is still undetermined. Because it was a federal investigation, any direct mention of charges against Samantha was still under wraps. My mind reeled, flipping between anger and grief. I could recall the wide-eyed woman I'd met at that backyard party so many years ago, giggling in the sprinkling rain, and I couldn't reconcile that memory with the possibility of her forging legal documents to seize my assets, all in cahoots with criminals. Larkin tapped her pen, telling me that they'd need further statements. I asked if I was free to talk with Samantha. They suggested caution, reminding me that if she was complicit, speaking privately could complicate evidence or allow her to shift blame. In the days that followed, Samantha texted incessantly. She sounded panicked, insisting she never wanted all this, and that Brandon had pressured her. Another payment from the fraudulent refinance had apparently vanished into a suspicious account. She now faced potential questioning by the FBI. I debated responding, but reason overrode emotion. My father's advice still guided me. A hasty confrontation might sabotage the progress made. I forwarded every text to Trevor and the agents, who thanked me for cooperating. Some nights, though, memory haunted me. Samantha was once my best friend, my partner. We painted our kitchen walls together, planned holiday meals, traded silly inside jokes, and now, in a few short months, we'd become adversaries entangled in financial sabotage. I would lie on the stiff motel bed, fists clenched as the truth sank even deeper. That warm life we built was an illusion, or at least it had ended the moment she saw a chance to discard me. Eventually, the FBI concluded they had sufficient evidence to charge both Brandon and Gary with fraud, conspiracy, and identity theft. Samantha's role remained uncertain, so they offered her an opportunity to cooperate if she truly hadn't orchestrated the bigger scam. By then, local media outlets were starting to sniff around, reports of an alleged real estate ring that preyed on absent soldiers. The station in Bolton ran a brief segment, mainly quoting unnamed federal sources. I worried I might be recognized, but the FBI assured me that cooperating witnesses are usually kept out of public mention until a formal indictment. Meanwhile, Trevor pressed forward on my behalf, ensuring the bank recognized I'd never agreed to any refinance or sale of the property. That locked up the funds so they couldn't vanish to hidden accounts. 48 hours after Gary's arrest, Samantha tracked me down. It happened so suddenly, I couldn't avoid it. I was leaving the corner diner where Trevor and I usually met, and she was standing near my car in the dim parking lot. She wore a heavy coat, shoulders sagging, hair windblown, face pale under the overhead lamp. As I neared, she gasped my name. Logan, please, can we just talk? My hand tightened around my coffee cup. Every instinct told me to keep walking, but curiosity about her side of the story tugged me. Summoning a calm tone, I said, "All right, but not here," and we ended up sitting in the back of the diner, where the waitress recognized me from earlier. Samantha held a mug of tea, swirling the tea bag absently, while I studied the lines of her face for any hint of genuine regret. She began talking in fits and starts, claiming she'd never intended this to spiral. Brandon said refinancing the house was a good idea, that you'd already agreed. He said he had a power of attorney from you or something. I was skeptical, but, she faltered, he's persuasive, and I was in a bad place. You were away so long, and you and me were barely talking. My stomach twisted. She kept going, tripping over her words. I didn't know about the bigger plan, Logan. I had no clue he was conning other families. I'm so sorry. I caught a glimpse of what might be sincerity in her eyes, or maybe just fear. She asked me if I could help her, with the federal case, or with telling them I'm not the mastermind. My voice came out flat. I gave them everything. If you truly did nothing knowingly criminal, you'll have your chance to say so. She ducked her head, tears shimmering, though I couldn't tell if they were real. In that moment, I felt an intense wave of sorrow for what might have been, yet it didn't wash away the determination to see this through. I didn't shout at her, didn't toss accusations. I simply paid for my coffee, stood and said, "You made your choices, now you live with them." She grabbed my arm, whispering, "Logan, I never wanted to betray you," but the words rang hollow. I slipped free and walked out. That was our last conversation outside of official proceedings. What followed was a blur of legal motions, depositions, and slow-moving bureaucracy.
The FBI indicted Brandon and Gary on multiple counts, including forging signatures to steal home equity from at least 4 service members who were away on duty. Samantha, presumably under pressure from her attorney, surrendered any claim to the house or my military pension in exchange for not facing heavier charges. She told investigators that Brandon groomed her, that she felt trapped, but the distinction between victim and willing partner was thin. She had, after all, accessed our joint account and wiped it clean. A normal spouse might have tried to call me or my attorney if something seemed fishy. Instead, she systematically looted me. She gave a statement admitting to forging my name on some documents, saying she expected no harm to be done because Logan wasn't using the money anyway. That phrase hammered me. It made me question if she ever really valued my presence or just my financial stability. Still, I saw no value in personally seeking retribution beyond what the law required. I refused to let bitterness devour me, so I settled. The divorce itself, ironically, was the least complicated matter. She had to sign a no-fault decree that removed her from everything. No spousal support, no piece of my pension, no share in the property. That meant I kept the house, battered though it was by the emotional storm. My biggest wish wasn't revenge, it was closure. By the time the official documents were finalized half a year after that first dreadful email in Evander, the physical structure of what had been my marriage was in ashes. But at least I still had my dignity and some unspoiled sense of self. On the same day that I got my final divorce papers, an update arrived from Agent Larkin. Her voice crackled over the phone. We just received sentencing details for Brandon Morgan, 8 years. Gary Shelton received 12. Since they scammed multiple states, the judge laid it on thicker for him. The relief that coursed through me was mixed with sadness. Part of me couldn't believe the path my life had taken. The next morning, local news stations ran a brief story about the guilty plea of a real estate broker involved in defrauding military families. They didn't name me publicly, though references were made to a soldier's vigilance leading to the bust. I quote, like to say I celebrated, but it was more subdued than that. The months of tension had chewed me up. I could barely muster a spark of delight. All I did was stare into the sky outside my motel, clouds drifting aimlessly on a crisp autumn day, and feel for the first time that maybe I was free to breathe.
The next few weeks I spent sorting out official bank documents, ensuring refunds for me, and hopefully compensation for the others who'd been tricked. I discovered that quite a few families, some in Florida, one in Arkansas, another in Illinois, were part of the claim against Brandon and Gary. Things looked promising for them to recoup at least some portion of their stolen funds. Eventually, I stepped back inside my Bolton home, once the epicenter of so many memories, both sweet and bitter. The dog's nails clicked on the hardwood as he cautiously greeted me, tail wagging. Brandon was gone, the agent's sign removed from the yard, the locks replaced. I stood in the living room, letting old ghosts drift around me in the silent air. I spotted faint scratch marks on the doorframe from the day I'd first brought our pup home. A wave of grief and relief washed over me. Despite the heartbreak, this was still my place, and I'd do what I wanted with it. But it's hard to sit among so many memories. So after tackling a modest remodel, fresh paint, new drapes, I couldn't bear it anymore. Maybe I was trying to cleanse every reminder of Samantha's presence. Maybe I simply craved a new horizon after so much chaos. Months later, I sold the property to a young Marine family with a brand new baby, ensuring the place would echo with fresh laughter. I took the money and scouted a quieter life in Redwood Springs, a small town in southern Wyoming. I found a snug cabin perched near a creek, large enough for me and my dog, plus space for a workshop if I wanted to dabble in carpentry. Having served for 2 decades, my pension was enough to keep me afloat while I decided my next steps. I took the honorable discharge. No more deployments. I was done looking over my shoulder for betrayals. Most nights I'd sink into an armchair on my porch, letting the hush of the forest soothe me. Sometimes, a random memory of Samantha's laughter might drift by. I didn't resent the recollection, but I no longer yearned for it, either. Let the past remain where it belongs. One afternoon, a letter arrived from a woman in Tennessee, whose husband was a pilot in the Air Force. She thanked me profusely, saying the federal case that sprang from my evidence helped them keep their home, stopping Brandon and Gary's group from forging documents there. Because of your diligence, she wrote, we're still safely grounded. Tucking that letter away, I realized that yes, something good emerged from my storm of betrayal. Maybe if I'd never sounded the alarm, more unsuspecting military people would have lost their homes and savings. So at the end of it all, I'd at least prevented further damage. Samantha faded into rumor. Some acquaintances said she bounced around from job to job, drifting across state lines. I heard she might have tried to start again in Colorado, but I never bothered verifying. Not once did I respond to her last pleading texts. She'd made her bed, no sense repeating the same heartbreak. If she was truly duped by Brandon, I felt an ounce of pity, but not enough to reopen that chapter. My father always said that if you give someone your trust and they break it, you can forgive, but you can't rewrite the broken vow. The best you can do is move forward, and forward I went. Even now, I stare at the horizon from my porch and remember the day I got that cold email in the desert. I remember how it scorched me with heartbreak in the pit of my stomach, but I walked a measured path, quiet, deliberate, until I saw it through, and that choice, ironically, gave me the final word. Ultimately, Samantha got her official closure with the law, and I got my dignity intact. When people ask if I regret anything, I say it's complicated, but I refuse to let bitterness be my final note. There's always a new dawn, and I'm living proof that a soldier's resolve doesn't just exist on the battlefield. Sometimes it's the only thing that can save your home, your finances, and your peace of mind when your life's bigger battles erupt from within. Now, in my secluded refuge, my biggest decision is whether to plant a new apple tree or maybe try my hand at raising chickens. On these quiet acres, no one's forging my name, no one's invading my house. My dog Raider chases squirrels along the creek while I whittle small sculptures in my workshop. Once or twice, I've even glanced at the old wedding album, seeing the illusions that used to shape my world. But if you ask me how I feel, I'd say I'm content. I lost a marriage, but I regained my sense of self, and in the process took down a con ring that threatened other unsuspecting families. That, in my mind, is a mission accomplished. 2 weeks slipped by in a haze after Samantha's email nearly shattered my focus. On base, nobody joked around me anymore, not after witnessing the guarded look in my eyes. Each day I forced down tasteless rations in the chow tent and double-checked my gear for patrol, determined to keep personal drama off the official radar. Soldiers learn quickly that you can't afford to be distracted in a combat zone. Even so, my mind churned at night, replaying the blunt lines of that PDF attachment. Over and over, I heard Samantha telling me she was already gone, and that my home in Bolton was teeming with a stranger's presence. Then one afternoon, while I sat alone in the mess hall, a notification hijacked my phone, a sudden withdrawal from our shared bank account. It was just a small chunk of cash, but still enough to jangle alarm bells. Samantha had taken nearly $1,100, leaving a balance that felt like a shell of what it used to be. I tried telling myself she might be covering bills or some urgent expense, but a creeping dread whispered that she was moving methodically, siphoning resources before I could react. The next day, I called the bank from a dingy phone booth wedged between plywood dividers in the base communications center. As I fed my card into the slot and punched in a dozen codes just to reach an overseas operator, the stench of cigarette smoke lingered nearby from whoever used the booth before me. A scratchy line connected me to an anxious bank clerk who said hushed phrases like unauthorized access and power of attorney. My pulse hammered. I had never signed any power of attorney over to Samantha for financial matters. Realizing I was dangerously in the dark, I told the clerk I needed more information. She paused, then repeated a practice script about verifying identity, scanning documents, and filing an inquiry. Her tone signaled that I might be in for a long, messy slog. That night, in the sweaty confines of our shared tent, I lay on my flimsy bunk, staring at the overhead canvas that rippled with the desert wind. Darkness highlighted every anxious thought. What if Samantha was forging my name on official papers? Could she be funneling everything to this Brandon, whoever he truly was? No matter how I twisted the puzzle, the only clear solution was to gather as many facts as possible and remain patient until my deployment ended. A furious confrontation over email wouldn't protect me. It would simply tip her off, giving her time to hide every last trace. Still, a part of me couldn't help missing the early days of our relationship. I recalled the first time we slow danced in a cramped bar near the military base where I was stationed. She wore a silver-striped dress, shyly glancing up at me whenever her hair fell across her face. Now that same person had informed me I was effectively replaced and that our life was already carved in two. Anger simmered, but I kept it contained. Determined to approach everything like a mission, I decided to fish for more clues. So I used the dusty laptop stashed in my footlocker, logging onto the home security system. One blessing of modern tech is that I still had access from thousands of miles away. Sure enough, the feed flickered to life, showing a grainy view of our front hallway. At first it looked empty. Then a tall figure appeared, striding around with the comfort of someone who belongs there. He wore a dark t-shirt and a baseball cap, carrying a bag of fast food. My dog, Rosie, trotted at his side, tail thumping. Brandon, I thought bitterly, the intruder who'd slipped into my world while I was risking life and limb overseas. A swirl of raw jealousy burned in my chest when I saw him open the closet, rummage through jackets, probably mine, then toss them aside like they were worthless. Samantha stepped into the frame too, wearing casual sweats and giving him a playful nudge. The sight knifed at me. She grinned at him right where we used to stand on lazy Sunday mornings, sipping coffee and mapping out the week ahead.
My breath turned shaky. I killed the feed, slamming the laptop shut. A leftover wave of resentment surged, but I refused to let it morph into panic. Several hours later, I forced myself to quietly join a group headed out for routine patrol. If I lost my focus on that mission, it could end badly for everyone. The scorching sun hammered us as we trudged outside the wire, each soldier scanning the rocky expanse. My mouth tasted of dust and regret, but I marched on. When your personal life is collapsing, you learn to tuck it away behind layers of discipline. Otherwise, fear can consume you, and maybe cost you or your team far more than heartbreak. Days clicked by, punctuated by nighttime mortar sounds and the occasional adrenaline spike of radio chatter. Whenever I found a spare hour, I emailed a friend back home, Ford, who'd once dealt with a messy divorce. Ford was no attorney, but he understood my predicament. "Lock your finances if you can," he typed. "Keep track of every penny." He also texted me the name of a top-notch family law attorney in Bolton, a woman named Naomi Walters. "She's known for being discreet and ruthless when needed," Ford wrote. "Approach her now, or at least get your name in her calendar." I took that first step immediately. Internet connections were spotty, but I drafted a carefully worded message, subject line reading, "Time-sensitive legal counsel, active duty." In the body, I explained that I was stationed abroad, that my wife had blindsided me, and I suspected something was seriously off with our finances. I set forth the possibility that she'd forged documents. Then I asked if Naomi would consider representing me despite the distance. After hitting send, I went to Chow, clinging to the thought that I wasn't entirely vulnerable. I had options, and I'd use every resource at my disposal to pull the rug out from under their scheme. Meanwhile, Samantha must have sensed my silence. She left me 3 short messages, each with a different tone. One was apologetic, saying she hoped we could finish this with minimal drama. The next read as if she was bored, like she was delivering a mandatory courtesy notice. "I'm moving forward, so please sign the documents without making it complicated." Then a newer, third note sounded borderline aggressive. "We need to talk about spousal support. I have bills to pay." The nerve of demanding money while I was out here, risking my life, stung like salt on an open wound. Yet I saw no profit in replying. This might be the first time in my life I embraced silence as a weapon. One scorching afternoon, after marching a perimeter route, I returned to base soaked in sweat. A small envelope from the States awaited me at the mail distribution tent. Inside was a hastily typed letter from a financing company I didn't recognize, addressed to me but referencing my application for some line of credit. My gut twisted. I hadn't applied for anything. That was all the evidence I needed to suspect forgeries were piling up. If Samantha and Brandon aimed to siphon every resource under my name, how far would they dare to go? It took a few deep breaths to steady my hands. I read the letter's bureaucratic language about missing supporting documents. No more illusions. I was sure now that someone was forging my digital or physical signature. At that moment, fury nearly consumed me. I pictured them rummaging through my files, imitating my handwriting to open new accounts. But anger alone wouldn't solve this. I needed calm, methodical control, like diffusing a hidden explosive. If I lost composure, they'd keep draining me. But if I kept silent, I might gather enough leverage to turn things around. So, I hurried back to my bunk to call Naomi's office, praying I could secure a half-decent phone line. Right as I started dialing, another soldier poked his head inside. "Hey Logan, we're moving out in 15. You coming?" Duty never waits. My entire body felt pinned between 2 imperatives: handle the crisis at home, or fulfill my obligations here. For a split second, I wanted to throw down my gear and scream that I couldn't keep living a double life, but I automatically switched to a clear, measured voice. "Roger that," I said. "I'll be ready." Outside, the clouds churned with desert storm tension. I grabbed my rifle and headed to the rally point, adrenaline spiking. As a staff sergeant, I had men depending on me to hold it together. If Samantha thought she could exploit my absence, she wasn't entirely wrong. I couldn't abandon my post. Yet she'd overlooked one truth. Just because a soldier is far from home, doesn't mean he can't strategize. And no forged signature in the world would protect them, once I started coming for what was mine. I double-timed to the waiting Humvees, refusing to let my personal storm compromise the mission. Deep in my core, I vowed that, once this patrol was over, I would push harder than ever to expose whatever they were plotting. A swirling thought hissed in my head. What if it's bigger than a simple divorce grab? What if they're setting me up for something even more destructive? I fought to keep that question at bay, but it lodged in my mind like a fresh thorn. What if? Burke and I barely spoke on the ride out that afternoon, each of us lost in our own thoughts as the Humvee bumped along the beaten roads. Hot air blasted through the open windows, and my gear dug into my shoulder. By the time we reached the perimeter, sweat was pouring down my temple. Still, my mind was half a world away, following Samantha and Brandon through imaginary corridors. I reminded myself to stay grounded. Lives depended on my efficiency here. The patrol was uneventful. Hostile territory seemed momentarily calm, but inside my head, a different war raged. I couldn't shake the image of Brandon pouring through my closet. That violation felt more biting than any bullet. After we returned, I yanked off my vest, chugged water from a lukewarm bottle, and marched straight to the comms center, determined to get in touch with Naomi Walters, or at least her assistant, before the day's end.
Inside the cramped phone booth, I tapped in the international codes, heart hammering. Static cut in and out as I got transferred twice. Finally, a calm female voice announced, "Walters and Associates, how can I help you?" I introduced myself briefly, stumbling over a few words, then explained the situation in controlled bursts, the suspicious refinance, possible forgery, overseas active duty. She listened without interrupting, which felt like a lifeline. When I finished, she cleared her throat. "Miss Walters does handle high-stakes marital property disputes, especially for military clients. She'll need a retainer to secure your spot. Can you confirm a method of payment?" My stomach sank. How ironic to worry about paying for counsel when Samantha was cleaning me out. I promised to wire funds from the small account I'd secretly stashed. The receptionist scheduled a voice consultation with Naomi for the following week and told me to gather any proof I could, including emails, bank statements, or screenshots. I sighed, relief mixing with dread. At least I wasn't flailing without direction. The next few days, I spent every free hour organizing the digital fragments of my life. I combed through monthly statements, flagged odd wires and online purchases I'd never authorized. Using patchy Wi-Fi in the base rec tent, I set up a secure folder, naming it Legal Armor, where I dumped each piece of evidence. It felt surreal to be mustering a defense against my own wife, but I clung to the principle that the worst thing I could do was remain idle. Every patrol was an exercise in mental juggling, reminding myself not to let personal upheaval endanger my unit. At night, when the desert cooled, I updated my logs under a single flickering lantern, toggling between official duty reports and my maddening personal drama. One evening, as I was finishing a short shift, Burke sidled up to me. "Heard you're in deeper trouble than you let on," he said quietly. Apparently, a rumor circulated that my spouse had ended things, and that I was hemorrhaging funds. Grimy exhaustion pressed at my temples, but I managed a half smile. "Yeah, something like that," I replied. He shrugged. "You want me to back you up when you talk to the brass about leave?" My eyes flicked to him. "Leave," I repeated. "You think they'd let me go home early for personal reasons?" I almost laughed at the absurdity. "In theory," Burke said slowly, "there's compassionate leave if the circumstances are dire. Draining your finances might qualify, especially with possible legal repercussions. Won't be simple, but you could try." The idea was tempting, yet ironically, the last thing I wanted was to walk into a trap unarmed. I needed to build my case, lock down a strategy with Naomi, and time my return so that I could secure what was rightfully mine, no matter how cold that sounded. If I showed up too soon, Samantha or Brandon might scramble and hide every trace of wrongdoing. But if I stayed away, their momentum could destroy me from the inside out. It was a no-win puzzle that left me feeling strangled. Meanwhile, Samantha shot sporadic messages. "We need the truck's title. You still owe on the credit card. That's half yours. How long are you ignoring me?" I answered none of them. Her tone shifted from coaxing to accusatory, then to weirdly polite again, like she was rotating evasion tactics. My father often said the best move in a crooked game is to observe the cheater until you have indisputable proof. I reminded myself of that with each unread message. When the scheduled consultation with Naomi finally arrived, I locked myself in a private office, really just a converted storage room with a flimsy table and a single chair. The phone connection crackled. Her voice was direct. "I understand you're concerned about mortgage fraud and a contested divorce. Let me hear the specifics." So I laid it out. Samantha's suspicious transactions, the possibility of Brandon impersonating me or forging signatures, the missing money, and the looming threat of a secret refinance. Naomi was silent a moment, then said, "It sounds like you've got a serious fraud case. Have you considered a forensic accountant?" I massaged my brow. "No," I admitted. "Can't say I've had the chance." She outlined the possibility, explaining how a specialist could trace funds and confirm who authorized each withdrawal or signature. She also suggested I contact local authorities in Bolton. When I told her I was deployed, she said firmly, "Leave it to me. I'll start with civil remedies, freezing assets, filing an injunction to stop any sale of your house. Then if your wife or her boyfriend crossed legal lines, we'll involve law enforcement." I thanked her, voice tight with relief, and set up the formal retainer. She recommended I keep quiet on social media, block Samantha's calls, and let my attorney handle direct contact. "You focus on staying alive over there," Naomi added, her voice softening. "Let me handle the dirty work here." Hanging up the phone, I felt a spark of hope. It was possible I could turn the tables. But I also sensed the weight of a deeper question. Had I ever really known the woman I married? I turned toward the door, heart thrumming. Outside, a sandstorm had begun swirling over the base, dust filling every crack. A single grim thought rose as I adjusted my collar and prepared to brave the wind. This was far from finished, and I still didn't know how viciously Brandon and Samantha might fight back once they realized the battlefield was shifting. The days dragged on with blistering heat and restless nights. Sometimes I could barely recall what normalcy felt like, the sense of having ground beneath my feet instead of shifting desert sands. Word arrived through base channels that a banking investigator in Bolton wanted a statement from me to confirm suspected fraud. Naomi reached out as well, requesting copies of my deployment orders, proving I hadn't been present to sign any refinance paperwork. Despite my focus on the mission, I spent every pause or lull gathering digital crumbs, scanning old emails, ensuring I left no angle uncovered. One evening, I found a rare 15-minute gap in the schedule and ducked into the half-lit corridor outside the rec tent. I used my phone to snap photos of my ID and my official leave forms, planning to email them to Naomi. As the camera's flash illuminated those grainy edges, my heart sank at the thought of how far I'd come just to prove I wasn't complicit in my world's ruin. A single desert moth flickered near the bulb overhead, dancing in the wavering light. In that moment, a longing to fast forward through every bureaucratic tangle stabbed at me. But no matter how I tried to distract myself, the knowledge that Samantha might be forging entire new paths with my name refused to die down. When I stepped back into the tent, Sergeant Mendez, one of our comms specialists, called me over. "Incoming," he said, handing me a folded note. It was from Burke, and it read simply, "Check your account." Now, my stomach clenched. I found a free laptop, hammered in my login, and discovered a fresh deposit made into my secret side account. The memo read, "Must cover debts." I had no clue where it came from, or why. Unsure if this was Samantha's attempt to ease guilt or a glitch in the bank system, I stared at the digits. They weren't huge, but big enough to leave me suspicious. Was this Brandon's meddling, or possibly hush money? A new wave of paranoia rippled through my mind. I typed out a frantic email to Naomi, explaining the unrequested deposit. Then I logged off before my next patrol. The entire drive in the Humvee, I felt tension building in my chest, as if I were strapped into a roller coaster, anticipating a sudden sickening drop. Even the dust swirling under the wheels reminded me of illusions, easy to stir up, hard to pin down. We spent half a day under a burning sun, searching for trouble beyond our fences, yet the real menace lurked back home, unseen but closing in. Shortly after we returned, Burke approached me. "Got word from Master Sergeant Perkins," he said. "They might grant you 2 weeks of compassionate leave." I set my helmet on a crate, raising an eyebrow. "Are you serious?" He shrugged. "Nothing official yet, but if the chain of command sees that your situation's severe, they could cut you loose to deal with it." The thought of finally facing Samantha, observing Brandon in my living room, and confronting all that deception tightened my throat, yet part of me itched to finish this mission on my terms. Hiding in a desert while they ravaged my life felt like cowardice, but leaping into the fight before building a solid plan might destroy my last advantage. I told Burke I needed time to think. That night, a swirl of hot wind pelted the tent walls as I scrolled through the images on my phone, snapshots of our house from earlier security feeds, Samantha's array of new outfits stacked in the closet, Brandon letting Rosie jump all over the couch I bought with my re-enlistment bonus. Anger seeped into my veins. I switched screens and reread the deposit notice in my separate bank account. Something about it felt off, like a Trojan horse you foolishly haul inside your gates. Later, the base generator hiccuped, causing the lights to flicker. Shadows skittered across the canvas walls. I lay on the narrow cot, drifting in and out of a haunted half-sleep. In my dozing state, I remembered the day Samantha and I strolled through the old orchard near Bolton, the weekend we first talked about building a future together. I shook off the memory. That dream was gone, replaced by cautionary armor. At dawn, I found a message from Naomi waiting in my inbox. "I've filed an injunction to block any sale or refinance of your home," it read. She wished me luck and said she'd contact the bank's fraud department. I nearly exhaled in relief. Any immediate attempts to sell the house out from under me had just hit a wall. Still, the email ended with a reminder. "Try not to communicate directly with your wife or her partner. We need to maintain a controlled approach." That instruction sounded easy in theory, but nearly impossible in reality. My gut burned with the urge to call Samantha out on every lie, every undermining detail. Later that afternoon, while cleaning gear with Burke, I mulled over the next move. I could request the official leave and show up at my own front door unannounced. Yet Naomi's caution echoed. Evidence is stronger when no one sees you coming, so I resolved to hold off just a little while longer. In the meantime, bits of intel trickled my way. I learned from Naomi that the man Samantha lived with had a known alias, Brandon King. He was tied to other questionable dealings, an alleged pyramid scheme, unverified loans, even rumored involvement in real estate quick flips. Naomi's team couldn't confirm it all yet, but it triggered alarm bells. Someone that savvy might be ready for me. 2 nights later,
I wrestled with sleep again, half dreaming of returning stateside as a ghost, moving unseen through rooms I'd built with my own hands. Each time I pictured Samantha's face, I found a swirl of conflicting emotions, regret, fury, even some lingering sorrow. But regret wouldn't solve anything, and sorrow alone never fixed a crisis. At 05:30, I jogged a few miles around the base perimeter, sweat rolling off my neck. By the time I finished, the sun had fully breached the horizon, painting dunes a brilliant gold. Through the scorching brightness, a single truth loomed: there were no shortcuts here. I had to be precise and patient, just as I would be disarming a buried explosive. One false step could leave everything in ruin, financially and emotionally. I reported to the command post by 6, heart pounding like a drum, ready to inquire formally about that compassionate leave. Just as I reached the door, Perkins waved me inside. His expression was stone serious. "Sergeant Hayes," he said, voice low, "we got your request, but we have new intel about the situation on the ground here. Hostile groups might be ramping up activity." He met my eyes. "We need all the experienced staff we can keep, so the final say's up to the colonel, and it might not go your way." A knot formed in my stomach. He motioned for me to stand by until official word came through. I clasped my hands behind my back, staring at an overhead fan that spun lazily, stirring thick, stale air. Every second stretched painfully. Was I about to be denied? The prospect of more weeks in the desert, powerless while Samantha and Brandon continued their stunt, made my pulse throb. And yet, what if returning home without the unit's blessing meant losing the goodwill of my command? Either path felt like stepping onto a mine. Footsteps echoed. Perkins lifted a phone receiver. The tension in me coiled tighter. The colonel was calling from deeper inside the camp. My throat went dry as I waited for whatever came next. I stood in that cramped command post, Perkins cradling the phone while a hum of background chatter filtered through headphones on nearby desks. My pulse hammered loud in my ears. If the colonel shot down my leave request, I was stuck watching my life unravel from thousands of miles away. Yet if I somehow forced my way home, I'd risk burning every bridge in my unit. Perkins finally hung up, turning to me with that same unreadable expression. "Hayes," he said quietly, "the colonel's aware of your situation. He says for now the answer is no go. We can't afford to lose you." My shoulders slumped even as I snapped to attention. Formalities aside, his words felt like a jagged spike in my gut. I offered a stiff salute, murmuring, "Understood, sir." In truth, understanding didn't soften the blow. On my way out to the yard, the full desert sun glared in my face, nearly blinding me. My heart reeled from the colonel's verdict. I was tethered here, no way home to mount a proper defense. For a breath, I considered taking unauthorized leave, just vanishing, and dealing with the repercussions later. But that would be career suicide, and I still had some sense of pride in my duties, a soldier's code I couldn't shrug off. Furious and helpless, I spent the next day drifting between duties in a dull haze. More patrols, more equipment checks, more half-sleepless nights scanning my phone for any sign Naomi had found new angles. Burke hovered at a distance, uncertain how to support me. I appreciated his concern but couldn't bring myself to talk about personal chaos. That evening, after forcing down bland rations, I got a ping from Naomi. She tracked a large withdrawal from the fraudulent refinance funds, and the money had gone into an account under Brandon's alias. She asked if Samantha might be clueless or complicit. The question stung like a direct accusation, but the truth lurked too close to the surface. Samantha had enough sense to know something about all these transactions, yet she hadn't lifted a finger to fix it. I typed a long reply, admitting I wasn't sure of her motives. Maybe she panicked when she saw the debt mounting, or maybe she'd been seduced by the promise of a bigger payoff. Honestly, I was past trying to decode her heart. My only concern was cutting off the scheme before they drained me entirely. Before I hit send, another email came in, this time from an officer in the local police department back in Bolton. She introduced herself as Detective Guerra, referencing a potential investigation involving fraudulent signatures on the mortgage. My throat constricted as I read her request to schedule a phone call or remote interview. Moments later, thunder boomed in the distance, and the base lights flickered. A sandstorm threatened to blow in, meaning comms could go down any second. I hastily typed out a response to Detective Guerra, saying I was ready to cooperate in any way possible. Just as I hit the final keystroke, an alarm sounded outside, and the tent walls rattled. I bolted upright. A swirl of hot wind slapped my face as soon as I stepped out, turning the horizon into a tan blur. Grit coated my skin, biting my eyes through half-shut lids. A few men scrambled to secure equipment. Others jogged to the main hall before the raging storm could bury them. Instinct told me to run for shelter, but I paused, letting that swirling dust sting my hands. This storm felt like a mirror of everything inside me, wild, unrelenting, and out of control. Eventually, I ducked into the makeshift gym, a dome-like structure that might hold up better against the weather. Inside, a few off-duty soldiers crowded around a radio, waiting for updates. Nobody said much to me. They must have sensed the roiling energy. I decided to vent my frustration on an ancient punching bag in the corner, jabbing until my knuckles throbbed. It was the only way to exercise the helpless rage coursing through my veins. Half an hour later, the
the worst of the storm subsided. News filtered in that we took no damage, just layers of dust caking everything in sight. The base speakers crackled with a half-hearted all-clear message. I set down the boxing gloves, panting. My phone buzzed. Naomi again, requesting more details on the so-called deposit that showed up in my side account. She also mentioned receiving a cryptic voicemail from Samantha, who either wanted to negotiate or fish for information. Naomi advised me not to respond. Returning to the tent, I tapped out a message confirming that the deposit was still a mystery, no explanation attached. My best guess was that Brandon planted it, or perhaps Samantha, hoping to muddy the water if we pressed charges. The entire situation reeked of amateur attempts at cover-ups. Naomi's parting line read, "Stay strong, this isn't over." Exhaustion pinned me to my bunk, but sleep was slow in coming. I replayed the image of Samantha's casual grin in my living room, repeating the question that gnawed at me. How could she toss our history aside so casually for some reckless con artist? Rage pulsed under my ribs, but so did heartbreak. Burke's voice drifted from the adjacent bunk. "You okay, man?" he asked softly. I swallowed. "Not by a long shot," I admitted. Then I shifted on that hard canvas cot, bracing for another night of mental chaos. Tomorrow, I told myself, I'd dig deeper with Naomi, Detective Guerra, whoever else I had to. If I couldn't leave, I'd fight from right here, because the last thing I planned to do was roll over and let someone else define how this ended.